Which free agent should the Buffalo Bills be targeting to help the defense? I'm offering nearly 40 names today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Tuesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day. And as a reminder to you, we are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Well, folks, yesterday on the podcast, we went through a bunch of names that I think the Buffalo Bills should be considering or targeting in free agency to help the offense. Today, we shift our focus to the defensive side of the football. I have a bunch of names that I think makes a lot of sense. We'll get into some of the big ticket guys, the value plays, the ones I want at each defensive position. We're going to start with safeties and linebackers, though, because I know that this is the hot button stuff, right? This is the two spots where the Bills could lose a big-time player, whether that's Tremaine Edmunds at linebacker or Jordan Poyer at safety. Then we'll get to the defensive linemen, corners, and we'll actually do punters today as well because the Bills have a need there if Sam Martin does not extend his contract with the Buffalo Bills. So let's talk safeties first. What's the need here? Well, if you lose Jordan Poyer, you've got a hole opposite of Micah Hyde. And there's the Christian Benford idea of transitioning him to safety. But outside of that, what else do you have? I don't think it's going to be Saron Neal. The Bills signed Zane Anderson. I don't think those guys are starters. The Bills need a starter opposite of Micah Hyde. So here are some of the names that really pop for me. And the good news is, if the Bills lose Jordan Poyer, there is an abundance of options for the Bills to consider. John Johnson, we'll start there. He was recently released by the Cleveland Browns. He's been a really good player for a number of seasons as a starter in the NFL. He started his career at the Rams. Then he went to the Browns. Really fits the split zone safety idea that the Bills tend to run a good amount of. Balanced skill set in terms of run defense, tackling, coverage. He'd be a great answer. How about Taylor Rapp, another former Ram? A guy that was a second-round pick by the Rams, really came into his own over the last two seasons. Might be an $8, $9, $10 million a year player, but you'd get younger, you'd have an athlete there, and you'd have a guy with some really good experience over the last couple of seasons, including obviously being part of the Super Bowl championship team 2 years ago. Nasir Adderley from the Los Angeles Chargers was a day 2 pick out of Delaware. Came on a little bit slow, had some injuries earlier in his career, but very clearly had his best season this past year. And he's a guy that has really exciting coverage instincts, but I really love his ability to tackle and trigger and play downhill from deeper alignments as well. Player I liked a lot coming out of Delaware. Took him some time with the Chargers, but really came into his own. He's 25, so you get a younger player there. And you could probably get him I would guess, $8 million a year type range if you wanted to pay that. Another veteran that intrigues me is Von Bell from the Cincinnati Bengals. He's the complement that they've enjoyed next to Jesse Bates for the last several seasons. More of the downhill player, not the one high center fielder over the top guy, right? The ball production hasn't always been there, but if you want that guy that can really be an enforcer playing downhill and tackling and allowing you to insert him into the box and really get some really good ability to tackle and play the run with a solid coverage skill set as well. You just don't necessarily get a ton of ball production. And he's a guy that you might be able to get for half the cost of Poyer, younger, that's been a part of, championship teams with what he's done with the Bengals over the last couple of seasons. Juan Thornhill, Kansas City Chief, second-round pick, if I'm not mistaken, out of Virginia. Guy with corner experience from his time at Virginia, really became a good split zone safety for the Chiefs. I like his ball skills. I like his coverage range. Has become a good tackler. I think there's a lot of versatility and interchangeability with his skill set that I would really like next to Micah Hyde. And again, a guy that has been on playoff teams, been on Super Bowl winning teams, 2 of them. You like that coming into your building, stepping into a big role in your defense. So those players that I just mentioned, probably north of $7 million a season to sign them. So with that in mind, I want to get into some of the more bargain bin type players. And there's some lesser names, if you will, that really intrigue me that I want to talk about here as we transition this conversation away from some of those big name safeties that are on the market. How about Terrell Edmunds, Tremaine Edmunds' brother, former first-round pick of the Steelers, has wound up developing into a pretty solid player. I'm not sure that he's lived up to the promise of a first-round pick, but he's physical. He's got great size and athleticism, and I think he's gotten better in coverage every year. And so if you do bring back Tremaine Edmunds, maybe you really sweeten the pot by also signing his brother to be a starter for your defense. I'm sure that would be something that is interesting. And look, you could look at that the other way around with Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's got a big-time need at linebacker. Could they lure Tremaine by extending Terrell and then making it a package deal type situation? I wouldn't rule that out. Nick Scott is a player that really pops for me as another former Ram. Thought he was really good against the Bills in that Week 1 game last year. Think there's some upward mobility there for him as a bargain bin type signing that you could get some big returns on. The name that might intrigue me the most of all the safeties available is Jabril Peppers. Was with the Patriots last year, signed a 1-year, $2 million deal, and had a good season. But then you go back to his time with the Browns, you go to his time with the Giants. He's been pretty solid. Still young, very athletic, really physical, can run. Like, there's a lot of interchangeability with him as well. He could be the real bargain play here. I'm not sure why he was so overlooked on the market last year. Again, 1-year, $2 million deal with the Patriots. But had a pretty solid season with New England, and I can see him really being an answer next to Micah Hyde. So he might be the name that intrigues me the most, especially if you can get him for 2 years, $8 million or something like that. A couple of players that I think are worth mentioning because of their familiarity with the Bills' new safeties coach, Joe Dana. One would be MJ Stewart, who was with Joe Dana with the Texans this past year. And MJ Stewart has an interesting path, played his college football at North Carolina. And he was there in a time period where I had a lot of good connections to that coaching staff and spent a lot of time around the program. And they loved MJ Stewart, absolutely raved about it. Anybody that I spoke to wanted to tell me about MJ Stewart. Winds up being a second-round pick by the Bucs. Doesn't really work out. Spent some time with the Browns and started playing safety a little bit more there in 2021. Then this past year with Houston, he really converts to safety, and he's starting to show some real promise. And so maybe there's some continued room for improvement there. And a guy that Joe Dana, the Bills' new safeties coach, has experience with. I'd extend that also to Andrew Wingard, who was with Joe Dana in Jacksonville for a couple of seasons. And now Wingard is a player that he went to Wyoming, so there's that. He never played with Josh Allen, but maybe he did. I think he actually came into the league 4 years ago, so there may have been a little bit of overlap at Wyoming. But Andrew Wingard has been flashy. When he's had opportunities to play, he's been pretty good, but it also feels like Jacksonville has not really been eager to commit to him, and they brought in other safeties along the way that have kind of pushed him into a third safety role, but there's been some flashy production. Again, the familiarity with Joe Dana, imagining him in a bigger role, maybe he could be an answer if you're looking for those bargain bin type players. I'll give you one more bargain bin. And it's a guy that I've really enjoyed studying, and that's DeAndre Houston Carson of the Chicago Bears. Been with Chicago since 2016, and he's been an amazing special teams player. But last year, when I really studied that defense over the summer, he got a real opportunity to play quite a bit, leading coming out of 2021 into 2022. And I thought he played well. I loved his range. I loved his motor, his urgency, his physicality, his tackling skills. And just feel like he'd be a nice third or fourth safety to round things out. So maybe you could sign DeAndre Houston Carson and one of the previously aforementioned players. So when it comes to safety, the good news is there's a lot of options. They could go in for a $7 to $10 million a year player, but when you get into this Jabril Peppers, Terrell Edmunds, Nick Scott, maybe you include MJ Stewart into that. I think you could find some value here if you move on from Jordan Poyer, which feels pretty likely to me. All right, just a moment. We're going to talk linebackers. And again, there's a lot of players to dig into there. But first, need to tell you about FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockdown. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's get into these linebackers. Again, the need here, well, if you lose Tremaine Edmunds, you're going to need someone to replace him. And I think just like with Jordan Poyer, if you don't commit the cap space necessary to bring back Poyer, if you don't commit the cap space necessary to bring back Tremaine Edmunds, you can sign a replacement, and then you also have additional money to help your roster in other areas. Now, I think we would all prefer Tremaine Edmunds and Jordan Poyer, or a lot of us would. But the silver lining is if you don't, you can still get a starter and help your team in other spots, because the cost will not be nearly as significant as it would be to re-sign Jordan Poyer or Tremaine Edmunds. So let's get into some of these names. And again, there's some veterans, there's some bargain bin. So let's have the conversation. The two veterans that were recently released that hit the open market that would make sense as a stopgap for a couple of seasons. Bobby Wagner with the Rams, Eric Kendricks released on Monday with the Minnesota Vikings. Both of those guys are experienced players, have been part of really good defenses that you feel like can come in for a couple of seasons and help your defense if you don't bring back Tremaine. So those are two players that are recently released that make a lot of sense. Levante David with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, look, there's probably a good chance Levante David doesn't leave the Buccaneers, right? He's been a long tenured player there, just outstanding production, part of, Super Bowl, right? The Super Bowl a few years ago, really, really rock solid player. 33 years old. He could be one of those players that's a buck for life. If not, if he does hit the market, you probably want to think about him because he's outstanding. 33 years old. You could probably get him for around $10 million a season. And, he can still play. There's no doubt in my mind. Jermaine Pratt, I'll go ahead and mention him now as well with the Cincinnati Bengals. If you're going to pay what it takes to get Jermaine Pratt, you probably just give that money to Tremaine Edmunds. But the prototype of really big, long, athletic linebacker, maybe not to the extent of Tremaine Edmunds, but you get a lot of that back in Jermaine Pratt. But again, if you're going to pay Jermaine Pratt what it's going to take to get him, you probably just want to bring back your own guy in Tremaine Edmunds. Now, as we get to the bargain bin type players, the big name here that stands out to me is a guy that I'm interested in as a potential low-cost player, like maybe 2-year, $8 million deal, something like that. Bobby Okereke of the Indianapolis Colts. A ton of length, athleticism, has really ascended throughout his young career with the Colts. Was a good player at Stanford. You feel like he can come in and provide an answer next to Matt Milano. David Long with the Tennessee Titans has really emerged for them. I really like David Long. Good coverage player, good range. The challenge there is you don't really understand why Tennessee wouldn't bring him back, but it really feels like they're a team in transition, right? They just released Bud Dupree. They're shopping running back Derrick Henry. It looks like they're trying to reset at a lot of spots. They cut Taylor Lewan and Robert Woods. Those moves have been happening. So it feels like they're a team in transition that, may want to consider letting some of their guys walk and collect some compensatory picks. But David Long would be a nice player to add in there. I think Spot Rack has him around $6 million a season. So that'd be interesting to me. Bobby Okereke, I already talked about him. David Long. Alex Anzalone, this is kind of getting a little further down the list. Alex Anzalone, experienced player, like his downhill ability. He's played last season with the Lions. You probably know him more famously for his time with the Saints. Has had some injury concerns, but if you're looking for a true hey, we need a guy to come in here that has starting experience, that can play downhill, that's known for leadership, he would make sense. And then I'll also put Drew Tranquill from the Chargers slightly in that bucket. He's probably he is a better player than Alex Anzalone, but when you talk injury concerns, this guy is just always banged up. He was healthy this past season, but his first 3 NFL seasons back during his time in college at Notre Dame, his injuries were a problem, but when this guy's on the field, he can play. So I'd be concerned about over-committing there. But the Bills have been pretty good about bringing in players that have had some injury concerns and some of that going away with their time in Buffalo. So could be a good potential risk-reward type situation there as it relates to Drew Tranquill. So your big-ticket names in terms of veterans, Bobby Wagner, Eric Kendricks, Levante David, Jermaine Pratt, Tremaine Edmunds, right? We'll put those all in the expensive veteran players. The bargain bin I like is Bobby Okereke and David Long. And then you think about an Alex Anzalone and a Drew Tranquill. Now let's go ahead and get to corner now, and then we'll transition to defensive line and punter. I know that these are a little bit out of position, or out of order that you'd expect me to go, but I want to try to get the logical positions lumped together. So let's get to corner real quick as we close out the back 7, because we've done linebacker and safety. At corner, here's the challenge for me as I consider free agency and the Bills and the cornerback position, is I'm not entirely sure they need anything. Maybe depth, and I think that really depends on 2 variables, well, maybe 3 variables, one being Dane Jackson as a restricted free agent. I think there's a good chance the Bills bring him back, not necessarily with a RFA tender of like $2.4 million, but bringing him back for a lesser deal. They did this with some other players in the past. I can see that working out with a Dane Jackson. So if you bring him back, you feel good about your depth there, especially with Christian Benford. If he's going to stay at corner and you have Dane Jackson back and you have Christian Benford back to go with Trey White and Kyer Elam as your starters, and you still have Taron Johnson in the slot with Saron Neal in the slot. Again, he could be a potential cap casualty, but maybe not. There's enough here for me to not really have a big concern. Now, you'll need bodies, right, to round out your roster, but nothing that really provokes me to have a big in-depth conversation about the free agent cornerback market, because I think there's a good chance it's Trey White, Kyer Elam, Dane Jackson, Christian Benford, Taron Johnson, and Saron Neal, and then you have some UDFAs and camp bodies. So I think the Bills are in fairly good shape as it relates to cornerback, which feels good, right? It's been a while since we've been able to say that. It feels like every year we're talking about CB2 and corner depth. And now I'm like, yeah, this looks pretty good. So they figured it out at corner, in my opinion. Now, they still haven't figured it out on the defensive line and potentially not at punter. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Let me take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, let's talk about the defensive line, interior defensive line, then edge, and then punter. We'll start with the interior defensive line, where the Bills have a sneaky need here. Jordan Phillips' contract is expired, and then the other 3 defensive tackles on your roster, Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Tim Settle, they're all entering the final year of their contracts. So you want to start building some stability beyond this season with your defensive tackle situation. And so whether that's extensions for a Daquan Jones or even an Ed Oliver, or signing player or players to a multi-year deal to secure some talent beyond this year, I think you have some stuff to consider. Now, at defensive tackle, the big ticket is Javon Hargrave from the Philadelphia Eagles, who I think is just a phenomenal football player. Big, dominant, defends the run, gets after the quarterback, can play up and down the front. I mean, he's one of my favorite players in the NFL. If there's a big ticket signing to be had on defense, I kind of hope it's Javon Hargrave. Again, I think he could be, I mean, he's probably north of $15 million a season, maybe even higher. He could be pushing 20. But I just put it out there. That would be a player that would excite me quite a bit. One other guy that I want to mention here in the big ticket bucket that I might stay away from, but I at least want to mention, is Dre'Mont Jones with the Denver Broncos. Still a fairly young player. What's challenging for me with a player like Dre'Mont Jones is I like the pass rush ability. It's just like at Ohio State. You like the athleticism. You like the rush ability, especially as an interior guy. But my guy gets his butt kicked in the run game. I mean, this guy gets blown off the ball. His run defense is poor. So if you want that and want to sign up for that, cool. You'll get a good pass rusher. But I think you're going to be dealing with a guy that's going to get blown off the ball quite a bit. And you're probably looking at well over $10 million a season for him, maybe 14. Now, here's the bucket of players that I think makes a lot more sense for the Bills. And it's pretty full. So we'll get through these guys, but just know I think there's a lot of bargain bin free agents that I think can come in and be your defensive tackle 3 this coming season. We'll start with Sheldon Rankins with the New York Jets. Just completed his 2-year, $11 million deal. Good pass rush, has come along. He's kind of a flashy run defender. I don't think it's ever going to be a strength. There's certainly times where he gets blown off the ball, but the pass rush and the fact that he's shown some consistency as a run defender at times intrigues me. Matt Ioannidis was with Washington, then spent last season with Carolina. Really balanced player in terms of pass rush, run defense, has versatility. He would make a lot of sense to me. David Onyemata has spent his career with the Saints. He's 30 years old. Another guy that has a balanced skill set, plays with a lot of energy that I think could be a 2-year, $8 million a year, two-year, $8 million deal type player that can really be your defensive tackle 3. Larry Ogunjobi began his career with Cleveland, had some good seasons, then 1 year in Cincinnati, 1 year in Pittsburgh. Another athletic, balanced skill set that can play multiple spots up front. And then Greg Gaines. Greg Gaines is a player that I know Von Miller loves a lot. Former Ram, obviously, had a really good season with Von the year that Von was there for like the last half and won the Super Bowl. Can play, I think he could play the 1 and the 3. You like that versatility. And, I don't know if the Rams are in position to bring him back, so he could be available. I'll mention 2 more players. Colin Saunders, Kansas City Chiefs, really, really dynamic physical profile here in terms of like just a big dude, but has just surprising athleticism for that size. He's been a rotational player for Kansas City, had some injuries earlier in his career, but as a bargain bin, could really get some nice return on him. He looks like a player to me that is primed to really start to take off in his career. So he interests me. And then also at least mention Jordan Phillips as the last guy here. You could bring him back. Now listen, I think the last 3 years of his career have told you that has a lot of injury concerns, soft tissue stuff. Obviously the shoulder this past year, had a calf, hamstring this year. He's had problems the last 3 years. He's missed a lot of games. He's tried to play hurt quite a bit. So if you think he can stay healthy, you can bring him back, but I get nervous about it. I do. So again, your big tickets here, your big ticket to me is Javon Hargrave, maybe Dalvin Tomlinson. I don't know. I don't know if the Bills will really be in on him. I think that's going to be really expensive, but so is Javon Hargrave, and I mentioned him. So at least mention Dalvin Tomlinson with the Vikings. Dre'Mont Jones, if you want the rush and an expensive player that can't defend the run, he's worth mentioning. But then this bucket of Sheldon Rankins, Matt Ioannidis, David Onyemata, Larry Ogunjobi, Greg Gaines, and then Colin Saunders are kind of the world that I think the Bills will be operating in. At defensive end, well, what's the need here? Shaq Lawson's a free agent. Von Miller is coming off of an ACL tear. AJ Epinesa is entering a contract year, and Boogie Basham just might not be that good. So I think you probably need to sign somebody here. I'll go right to the guy I hope the Bills sign. I hope they sign Justin Houston. Justin Houston, he's 34 years old, and whether it was with Kansas City or with the Colts or with the Ravens the last couple of years, this dude just produces. And I'm not sure why, like the last several years, it's been late, like weird contracts, not a ton of money for him. Even at times signing very late in the offseason. Dude, I'd bring him in without hesitation for next year. Spot Rack has him as like a $5 million salary guy. If you can get Justin Houston for 1 year, $5 million next year, or like add a void year or something, like I am absolutely signing up for that. This dude just produces all the time. One of those veteran know-how guys. I mean, he's 1 year older than Von Miller. And Von Miller just signed like 6 years, $120 million. And Justin Houston's out here potentially getting $5 million per. I do that. I do that without hesitation, especially with the pedigree there, the veteran leadership, the experience. That would be an easy choice for me. Melvin Ingram, I'll go ahead and mention him. Spent this past year with the Dolphins. Had a good season. Seemingly always signs somewhere late and has good years. Would not mind him on the Bills at all. High energy player. Love what he brings to the table. If you want to get a little younger, I got some options there. Agbanya Okoronkwo started his career with the Rams. I feel like there's a lot of guys that started their career with the Rams that I'm talking about today. Last season with Houston, so he's got that Joe Dana familiarity. Again, not a safety, but certainly in the same building, you have a feel for who he is. Gives you some athleticism, some speed, some bend off the edge. That intrigues me. Samson Ebukam with the 49ers has been a really good rotational player for them. I think there's some similarities between the 49ers and Bills, both from a rotation perspective and just stylistically how they play defense. I think he'd be a pretty seamless transition, probably $5-6 million a year player. Dante Fowler, former first-round pick with the Jaguars, spent time there, obviously. Falcons, Dallas most recently. I think he can be a really solid third defensive end. No question in my mind. And then you should probably at least mention Shaq Lawson. You could just bring him back and run it back with these defensive ends. I think that'd be okay, but I don't know. I get really excited thinking about Justin Houston. I think he'd just be a really nice presence for this defense that produces every single year. And I have no reason to believe that he's going to slow down next year. So 1 year deal with him, come try to be part of a championship team. Another veteran player in Von Miller that's going to be there. I would try to go after him for sure. So there you have it at edge, defensive end. I don't know that I gave you a big ticket because I don't know if that makes sense here. You're paying Von, you got Greg Rousseau, you got some young depth players. To me, it's about getting that meaningful rotational piece that can come in and really make an impact in a part-time role and give yourself a nice little hedge in case Von Miller's not quite ready to start the season. Last position that we need to get to is punter, and I don't want to spend a ton of time here. I know you guys know I like punters and special teams and all that type of stuff, but I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of sick and tired of talking about punters and the Bills. I'd like to have one off season where that's not a key part of our conversation. I've been doing this podcast since 2019, so we went through the Corey Bojorquez stuff, and Matt Hawk, the Matt Ariza stuff from last year. Sam Martin came in, and I've said it so many times, I'll say it one more time. Sam Martin provided this team with the best punter season that I've seen since Brian Moorman's second to last year, which I think was like in 2010, because Brian Moorman's last year, he was terrible. But that year before that, he was still pretty solid. It's been a long time since we got punter contributions to the degree that Sam Martin delivered it. So I'd really like for the Bills to just bring back Sam Martin. I feel like he fit in quickly, did a nice job as a holder for Tyler Bass, was very reliable. Sign me up for some more Sam Martin. If not, Brett Kern is still out there. Grew up on Grand Island and longtime punter with the Titans, and they drafted I'm not sure. They may have just got a UDFA and Ryan Stonehouse, who came over and just won the job, wound up being a sensational rookie punter. And then Brett Kern, like, didn't sign anywhere. He wound up signing with the Eagles, like, later in the process. Some funny comments out there from his dad about not signing in Buffalo and kind of waiting it out. And then that didn't really work for him. He's had his last season in Tennessee, and then what he did for Philly this past season wasn't great. So he's definitely not my preferred option. My preferred option is Sam Martin. But if you had to fall back somewhere, you could look at a Brett Kern. Thomas Morstead's out there. I'm sure Miami would like to have him back, but he's at least another veteran punter worth mentioning. But to me, just bring back Sam Martin and let's not talk about punters. That's what I'd like to do here. So there you have it. A bunch, almost 40 names there that we talked about that I think the Bills should be considering and targeting when it comes to adding free agents on the defensive side of the football. Now, the rest of this week's going to be fun. We're going to do my mock off season where I go through the entire process. We create the cap space, we sign free agents, we do a mock draft, and we finish with a 53-man roster projection. So that's coming this week. We'll get to some herd mentality as well. We'll deal with any breaking news that comes our way. So it's starting to heat up. We got this week, and then that legal tampering period opens on Monday. So roster changes are happening, and it's going to be a lot of fun. You guys know that I love roster construction, team building, and we are going to see Brandon Beane's plan here very, very soon. And of course, we're going to talk all about it here on the podcast. So don't miss anything. Make sure you're subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.